only for 2 minutes. Уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа, позвольте. Вот. Позвольте начать наше сегодняшнее заседание, если благословят устроители, да? Благоустроители. Вот. Я попробую сказать несколько слов не на British English, а на terrible English, but I will try, if you don't mind. Dear colleagues, on behalf of the Academy, I am pleased to welcome Professor Roger Trigg with his lecture, Democracy and Religion. We know you, dear Professor Trigg, as a famous representative of the British philosophical community, the head of many research projects, your books and articles, especially your recent works, devoted to issues of religion, religious freedom, toleration in contemporary society. It's a great honor for us to accept you during your visit to St. Petersburg. The visit is organized by the St. Cyril, как мы говорим? Cyril. Thank you. The St. Cyril and St. Methodius Theological Institute of Postgraduate Studies of the Russian Orthodox Church, with the blessing of Metropolitan Hilarion. The day before yesterday, you gave a lecture at the State University of St. Petersburg, yesterday in the Theological Academy. The third event in this series is your lecture here in the Russian Christian Academy for Humanities. This institution is a bit younger than Oxford University. In the following year we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of its founding and the 20 years of the beginning of our program Religious Studies for students. Meantime, this is a serious, I think, long way for non-state university in post-Soviet Russia. Our academy, not only one of the centers of philosophical life here in St. Petersburg, it's a research and publishing center, a platform for interreligious, state-religious dialogue. I am very pleased to note that in this hall here, there are not only the students and professors of our academy. Here we can see the students, PhD students of the Theological Academy of the Russian Orthodox Church. It's one of our founders. Representatives of the Institute of St. Cyril and Methodius, the Russian State Pedagogical University, the Theological Institute of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Ingria, the High Catholic Seminary in St. Petersburg, representatives of other institutions which I cannot unfortunately list. Let me thank you, dear Professor Trigg, for the opportunity to hear your lecture. We are also grateful to the organizers of this visit, Archpriest Vladimir Shmali and Dr. Irina Kramets, and Dr. Dmitry Uzlanin. And before giving the floor to the moderator, I would like, on behalf of the rector of our academy, Professor Dmitry Burlaka, donate Professor Trigg to present small gift. It's one of our latest editions of our publishing house, Orthodoxy Pro and Contra. One of the author and the editor of this book, professor of St. Petersburg Theological Academy, Archpriest Vladimir Fedorov, is here on the second. This is a book including reception of our philosophers, theologians, writers, Russian writers about Orthodoxy. We have 3 other books about Catholicism, Protestantism, and Islam. If you will teach Russian using this book, it's very good. But if not, maybe you will send this book to the library of the university, and if they will be interested in receiving other 3 books, we will send him as a gift of our academy. Again, thank you very much, dear professor. Thank you, and we are waiting for your lecture.
Я хотел бы тоже поприветствовать всех собравшихся от лица организаторов. Хотел бы сказать несколько... I will speak in Russian. Хотел бы сказать просто несколько слов о проекте, в рамках которого проводится эта лекция. Это проект, который называется «Серия лекций «Религия, наука и общество», который организует общецерковная аспирантура и докторантура при поддержке фонда Темплтона. Это 3-летний проект, каждый год посвящен своей теме. В этом году тема «Социология религии» и под общим названием «Переосмысление секуляризма». В следующем году будет тема, связанная с философией религии. И последний год проекта будет посвящен теологии религии. К сожалению, здесь в данный момент отсутствует отец Владимир Шмалий, проректор общецерковной аспирантуры, который попросил поприветствовать от его лица, а также сообщить, что данное мероприятие проходит при благословении митрополита Илариона. Соответственно, хотел бы передать благодарность и Дмитрию Викторовичу, и Русской Христианской гуманитарной академии за то, что согласились провести это мероприятие. Собственно говоря, хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить всех собравшихся и передать слово профессору Триггу, который прочитает лекцию, посвященную демократии и религии. So, let's greet Professor.
Спасибо. And now I must apologise because the rest will be in English, and I apologise for not being able to deliver the lecture in Russian, but you have it there, I hope. Is religious freedom an optional extra in any free and democratic society? Why is religious freedom special? Is it special? Now, even posing these kinds of questions can seem odd. Assuming that freedom of religion includes the freedom to deny religion, to be an atheist, as well as to be committed to a particular one, the issue is whether a society can be in any sense free if we are not allowed to make up our minds as to what is most important in life and act accordingly, manifest our beliefs. Religion is concerned with the most fundamental matters of the nature of the world and of the place of humans in it. From judgments about this follow beliefs about what is worth pursuing and what should be avoided. Indeed, many would argue that even the most essential constituents of democracy, a belief in the equality of all, a respect for the right for everyone to follow their consciences, those beliefs themselves have religious roots, even Christian ones. The whole idea of human rights itself depends on a view that humans are special in some way. We're not just animals. We all have a dignity, and that dignity is itself in need of a grounding. Many indeed would argue that it is only the fact that we're made in the image of God, the imago Dei, loved by God, that can give such a grounding. The point is not whether such arguments are valid. It is that they're sincerely put forward and that they give an important justification from a religious perspective for some of the essential foundations of any free and democratic society. Without religious beliefs, a belief in freedom itself can lose valuable support. There seems something perverse in restricting the freedom in any way of those who wish to express and act on beliefs that themselves support that very idea of freedom. Unless, of course, you're in the business of controlling others. Now, some societies may oppose all religion on the grounds, admitted or not, that religion inevitably posits a grounding of authority that is not just separate from the state, but superior to it. Religion can therefore, it seems, undermine the loyalty of citizens to their country, or to the authorities in charge of it, or so it may seem. That's no doubt the fear, for instance, of the Chinese government, which dislikes religious organizations such as house churches, which are totally separate from the apparatus of the state and not controlled by it. Organizations such as the Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association and the Protestant Three Self Patriotic Movement explicitly acknowledge that their primary loyalty has to be to their country. As the word patriotic suggests, the state is more important than the religion. The state is above God. Yet it is a paradox that such control of religion and even its stifling may not only be counterproductive, but even undermine the state's own purposes. In contemporary China, for instance, it's being increasingly realized that the state needs more than a society which is economically vigorous and expanding, as China undoubtedly is. And if this results in the ruthless pursuit of individual wealth at all costs, even through corruption, the result can be stabilizing for the society as a whole. A society has to have a common morality. Capitalism itself, without a moral basis, can not only become an instrument of social injustice, but carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. The pursuit of short-term profit over everybody's long-term interests can be devastating, as problems in financial markets have illustrated in recent years. The watchword in London stock markets was once, "My word is my bond." But it's all too apparent in recent years that any kind of dishonesty can too easily be justified in the search for major financial gain. And the result has not been prosperity, but possible ruin. We're still facing the consequences. Yet where is all of that morality to come from? The morality that involves making promises and keeping them. The problem with any system of morality is that it's bound to restrain the desires of individuals at times, so as to serve what's called the common good. Morality can work against one's own immediate interests. And religion has traditionally been one very powerful source of moral authority. Now, I'm not going to enter into the argument at the moment whether it is the only source. No doubt anti-religious people can have their own versions of morality, but they will be coloured by whatever worldview they happen to have, even the anti-religious one, and many moralities are coloured by a religious outlook of the world, and that's what gives them their content. The point is that if freedom to adopt or reject religion is prescribed, or even strictly controlled in any given society, many of the sources of morality will immediately dry up. Loyalty to the state and its purposes will be enforced instead, but that immediately involves a centralization of the control of ideas that inevitably lead to denial of individual freedom. Freedom is indivisible. One cannot in the end just have some freedom. You either have it, or true authority, ultimate authority, is placed in a regime that then has to become progressively more oppressive. So either one can judge for oneself what is most important for humans, or one has to be told by others where one's priorities lie, where they should be. And that will inevitably affect all the parts of my life. I cannot be allowed to be a judge in some respects, but not others. In some compartments of life, but not others. That is why the restriction of freedom of judgment and of conscience that controls of religion inevitably bring begin to tread the path to a fully fledged totalitarianism. So I cannot have economic freedom without religious freedom, because I cannot then choose what my economic priorities should be, what is really good. Freedom of religion in any society is not just a matter of the freedom of the individual to hold beliefs, important as that may be. You've got to act on beliefs as well as just think them. There is an increasing tendency, though, even in Europe, to accept the absolute right of everyone to hold whatever beliefs they like, to think them, including religious ones, but to bring restrictions immediately into a play where those beliefs are manifested, particularly if they conflict with current policy priorities in any given society. Now, that means, for instance, that freedom of worship can be allowed. You can worship in the mosque or the synagogue or the church, but once you do anything more in the street outside, manifestations run into difficulties. Religion becomes private, not public. Yet any totalitarian government, I think, would be happy about individuals holding beliefs at odds with those promulgated by the state if they keep quiet about them, never tell others about them, never act on them, so that nobody ever knows. The beliefs become inoperative, they don't influence others. In communist Europe, in countries such as Czechoslovakia and Hungary before 1989, many professionals, such as judges in courts, teachers in schools, became used to living this kind of lie. They believed one thing about the demands of justice or about what ought to be taught, but still acted in conformity with the will of authorities. Teachers thought one thing, taught another, in accordance with the requirements of the state. I remember a Hungarian describing graphically to me how his daughter was called in to headmistress and told she mustn't say what she was saying against communism. And they got the father in, and the headmistress said, "We all agree with her, we know what she's saying is right, but don't let her say it." Now that kind of insincerity, whilst acceptable to a regime in the short term, might indeed well spell danger for its future stability. More important, though, it's completely and profoundly stultifying. Societies that depend on central control rather than individual initiative become ossified and resistant to change. It's no coincidence that science has not flourished under such regimes. Any form of development can then wholly depend on the wisdom and foresight, such as it may be, of those in control of the state. Mistakes and shortcomings will be magnified in their effects. Particular ideologies may distort the judgments of leaders. The desire to maintain their own power may be paramount. When decision-making is dispersed and there is a free exchange of ideas in religion and elsewhere, mistakes may be made and errors entered into. But that can be balanced against the good judgment of others. And then error need not be catastrophic. Now the issue isn't just one about the freedom of individuals to manifest their beliefs, to act as they wish, to believe what they will about what is true. In any free society, there has also to be a freedom for institutions, acting as a buffer between individual and the state. Without that necessary interface, the freedom of individuals will inevitably come to be controlled by the state. And in what I've written, I've put a capital letter, and the capital letter becomes ever more significant as the state becomes more powerful and gathers power to itself, perhaps by default. And this can happen in the West even today. You can see it happening even in so-called liberal societies, where even in apparently free Western societies, interference by the state, often by a well-meaning bureaucracy, results in the stifling of individual initiative. Yet without some institutional setting, individuals will each go their own way, unguided by any shared moral code or common world view. Civil institutions, and I'm thinking in Western countries and other countries particularly of the churches, which are the prime but not the only examples, these are necessary for the inculcation of moral vision and even indeed a love of the freedom which should sustain any society. It's interesting in this regard that very recently, just 2 or 3 months ago, in July 2013, the European Court of Human Rights, which of course has jurisdiction over all the countries belonging to the Council of Europe, including countries such as Russia, they came to a judgment about the Orthodox Church in Romania, which strongly supported the crucial necessity of a church to be able to conduct its own affairs without external interference. The case concerned the desire of Romanian priests to set up a trade union in defiance of their hierarchy. The court, though, was very clear that, as it put it, the autonomous existence of religious communities, and I'm quoting, is indispensable for pluralism in a democratic society, and is an issue at the very heart of the protection which Article 9 affords. Now, perhaps I should explain, Article 9 of the European Convention of Human Rights, to which I think all the countries that you belong to subscribe to, Russia, Britain, etc. The European Convention of Human Rights, Article 9, protects freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and also conditionally protects manifestations of religion or belief. Not all manifestations can be allowed, we can talk about that. There have to be some limits, but the presumption is that one ought to be able to manifest one's beliefs. The state, the court believes, though, must be neutral and not act as the arbiter between religious communities and the various factions that exist or may emerge within them. Now, that may all be very well in principle, and institutions are important. But in practice, regimes of many types have resented the existence of alternative sources of power and influence within a society. The history of the West, even in England, is replete with examples of the struggle between church and state. The history of Europe as a whole shows that societies that allow religious freedom and foster respect and officially recognize the existence of institutions in their own right have usually been more dynamic and successful, both politically and economically, than those that have tried to impose uniformity, particularly in religion, that's what I'm thinking about at the moment, in the interests of national unity. The problem is how to balance the undoubted benefits of social cohesion and national unity, which are important, with the healthy exchange of ideas and the ability to subject them to rational criticism. The existence of stable institutions, such as churches and other religious organizations, which are themselves dedicated to furthering the common good and to educating children in that vision, can themselves be bulwarks for the freedom that is the spring of all human advance. It is a paradox that the more that individuals want freedom for themselves, without the interference of outside organizations, such as churches, the more the state has to step in and regulate. And this is a particular problem in a liberal society where there is no buffer really between state and individual. And that's why institutions are so important. Without institutions acting as buffers between the state and the individual, more and more power inevitably accrues to the state itself, if only to protect individuals in their interactions with each other. A so-called liberal state can be experienced as very authoritarian, particularly by minorities in what appears to be a free society. And I'm not just thinking of a cohesive majority, I'm thinking of the democratic majority. There is such a thing as the tyranny of the majority, even almost an elective dictatorship. Majorities can dominate without caring for minorities, and they can become very oppressive. So the existence of autonomous civil institutions can themselves be an important factor in preventing this, so as long as they obtain due recognition from the state. Now, is religion special? I've been talking about freedom, but why religious freedom? All of what I'm saying would be still challenged by those who don't see religion as being in any way special. Giving it protection, secularists would say, is to give it privilege. Respect for freedom of conscience is enough, although it's important to note that this would not involve giving any special regard to religious institutions. Conscience is intrinsically a notion about individuals. And religious views, then, if we talk only about conscience, become a matter only for individuals, not institutions. And they can then appear merely like personal preferences, to be ranked in a democratic society alongsst other preferences. Some people prefer religion, others prefer football. But writing from a Canadian perspective, the eminent philosopher and social theorist Charles Taylor argues, along with a colleague, that respect for the moral equality of individuals and the protection of freedom of conscience and religion constitutes the two major aims of their version of secularism. So that's freedom of conscience and religion and moral equality. In other words, secularism ought to have a more positive attitude to the production of a religious conscience than sometimes seems to be the case. Taylor and his colleague McClure hold up the model of a political society that agrees about basic political principles so that we can live together and resolve disputes while accepting differences. They insist that the model includes respect, as they put it, for the plurality of philosophical, religious, and moral perspectives adopted by citizens. Now, democracy is necessary precisely because of the existence of disagreement. If we all agreed, we wouldn't need democracy. Presumably, heaven is not a democracy. Anyway, we need to respect and indeed nourish alternative points of view. There may be different conceptions of a good society, but even if one prevails, others should not be extinguished, because that would be the end of democracy. In any democracy, there, for instance, has to be an organised opposition to government, to be an alternative government. Otherwise, there is no alternative. The same goes for any moral or other outlook. In a democracy, one has to accept that people will differ. We are all indeed not omniscient, and we can't afford simply to drive away all the views with which we disagree, even if we think we're right. Now, McClure and Taylor see religious diversity as an aspect of the phenomenon of what they term moral pluralism, with which contemporary democracy has to come to terms. And they explain, and of course they're writing particularly with the knowledge of Canada, they're writing from Quebec, but they believe that moral pluralism has to recognize, in fact, that individuals adopt different and sometimes incompatible value systems and conceptions of the good. As a result, in the realm of core beliefs and commitments, the state, to be truly everyone's state, must remain neutral. In other words, the picture is of lots of different moral views. The state has to stand back from all of them and not championing one of them. Now, that idea that neutrality helps the identification of everyone with the state does run deep in liberal political philosophy, particularly at the present time. The idea is that somehow one is a second-class citizen if the state espouses a religious or moral outlook one does not share. Often secularism is just put in a religious context, but here they're extending it and saying, well, it applies to even a moral outlook. The state has to be morally neutral. Yet, it is a commonplace that in a democracy many citizens will deplore things that the state does in their name. The state can never be totally neutral unless it's going to become paralysed. It has to do things. If a country fights a war to which some, perhaps many citizens have objections, doesn't make it any less their country. The test is not in a democracy whether you get your way. The test is whether you're treated any less as a citizen, whether you've been able to contribute your point of view. You may be in the minority, but you've been heard. You haven't been debarred from some activities. You haven't been otherwise victimized. So mine or anyone else's citizenship does not depend on my views being accepted, but on my continuing right to offer them freely and expect them to be taken seriously. So I don't see why the democracy has to be neutral in order to be a genuine democracy. And as I said, a neutral democracy might be a paralysed one. A democracy indeed provides an umbrella for disagreement. It shelters everyone. It recognises difference. It tries to accommodate it. But it will never satisfy anyone. If your party is not in power, you won't like what the government is doing. But perhaps one day your party will be in power. But the government, any government, has to have definite policies and pursue them. And democracies cannot allow themselves to be paralysed by internal dissension. Now, the idea of McClure and Taylor is that somehow freedom, neutrality, the separation of church and state, it's all bound up together. And the state, to be fair to everyone, has to be neutral. So they regard it as indispensable for the operation of so-called secularism that the separation of church and state and the neutrality of the state towards religions is upheld. The European Court of Human Rights is drawn to this picture, which is why I've been talking about it a bit, because I don't know how far it applies in Russia, but the European Court of Human Rights certainly has an influence in the United Kingdom. And its picture is of the state as a neutral referee managing the different and warring preferences of its citizens. Should one type of preference then be given any precedence, religion and morality then can soon appear to have the same weight as any other desire or wish. They're just one desire or wish to be put in the pool, and it would seem odd for special provision to be made for the accommodation of some desires and not others. It is not enough, though, to see religious views merely as preferences, however much they might matter to those who hold them. And human rights law, expressed not only in the European Convention but in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, many national charters, always picks out freedom of religion as something that should be upheld, other things being equal. Indeed, in the United States it's called the first freedom. It may be difficult deciding whether other things are equal, but religion as such should be taken seriously. All of the charters agree. Not just because believers take it seriously, but I think because of its subject matter. It concerns what believers regard as ultimately important, as I've said, and as such cannot be marginalised in a free society. But conflict can unfortunately arise once different religions are ignored and not given the attention they claim. The fear of religion as an irrational and dangerous force may have its origin in the fact that if a religion is the most important part of somebody's life, it can't be suppressed or ignored without consequences. Democracy should be a system that provides a safety valve for people to believe what they like and to, in fact, disagree but live together. But that means it's not enough for people to believe what they like privately. They must be allowed to bring those beliefs to the public forum and, crucially, to act upon them. In a diverse society, not everything could be allowed in the name of religion. Polygamy is a controversial instance of something that may be sanctioned, even encouraged in some religions, but should surely perhaps be forbidden in a democratic society, not least because it may appear to involve injustice to women. But the problem is always where to draw the line, to decide what can and cannot be tolerated, where the limits are. Governments and courts can be tempted to draw it narrowly, making freedom of religion and freedom of worship synonymous. Once you step out of church, you're in the public square, you mustn't manifest your beliefs. And once people are free to attend public worship, it may then seem that other practices may not be seen as part of the core beliefs of their religion. Now, the European Convention of Human Rights, and I'll come back to that, talks of the right to manifest religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice and observance, yet it is a matter of contention that what counts as practice and observance and how closely it has to be related to the core teaching of a particular religion, it's all really far from agreed. Judgments about what is and is not core involve courts in theological issues they're never competent to deal with. You don't want judges deciding what's theologically crucial. Taking evidence on the matter from representatives of a religion won't resolve the matter, as there can't only be diversity between religions, but diversity within religions. Even with Islam, about whether to wear a headscarf or face veil for women, for instance. And most Christians might not find it important to manifest their faith by wearing a cross, but not all would agree. It's self-evidently the central symbol of the Christian faith. Not all Christians observe Sunday in the same way, but some may still wish to observe it more strictly, and it is the traditional day for Christian worship. So there is variation within religion. As I've said, many Muslim women don't see the need to wear a headscarf, but that doesn't impinge on the sincerity of those who do. Religions themselves are not internally monolithic, and a religious conscience may be informed by the practices of the group, but the practices of a group are also influenced by the consciences of individuals within it. So there's a constant dynamic between individual and community. And respecting consciences is important within any religion as in wider society. The need to respect institutions should not inevitably override the freedom of their members to hold non-standard views. Again, obviously within limits. Well, we're forced back to the question whether conscience is just a subject matter, whether there is something special about a religious conscience. What's special about religion? Otherwise, as I've said, everything collapses into the idea of strongly held personal preferences. Freedom of religion is then lost within the wider notion of freedom of conscience, and the latter devalued. Conscience as such can then be subordinated by wider interests, such as the interests of employers. If you don't say there's something special about religion, it can easily get trumped by other considerations. Secular interests trumped religious ones. But paradoxically, once respect for religious principles is seen as a species of a more general respect for conscience, conscientious stands of a more general kind are more easily dismissed. Freedom of religion does imply a more general freedom of conscience and the freedom to deny religion, and many serious conscientious stands can be respected by analogy with respect to the tolerance and respect acknowledged as due to religion. But the more that conscience just replaces religion, the less specific is the area to be ring-fenced, so that in the end religion becomes religion or belief, and it becomes any belief, any conscience, and then it just widens into almost nothing. More practices demand accommodation, and the limitations necessary on accommodation will grow. Not all beliefs and preferences can give rise to a ground for reasonable accommodation. We still have to face the problem about which should be ruled out as incompatible with the rights and freedoms of a democratic society. McClure and Taylor give weight to religion because they see religious commitments just as part of a person's more general moral identity. They claim the more a belief is linked to an individual's sense of moral integrity, the more it is a condition for his self-respect, and the stronger must be the legal protection it enjoys. And their conclusion is that the special legal status of religious beliefs is derived from the role that they play in people's moral lives, rather than from an assessment of their intrinsic validity. Now, Taylor's trying to allow room in a society, and as I've said before, he's particularly thinking of Canada, perhaps particularly Quebec, where there is now considerable religious diversity and even tension between religions, and he wants to allow room for respecting religion without implying that religion is necessarily about anything important or that it deserves special consideration above other forms of worldview. It's just that it seems important to individuals because it's part of their morality. Aspects of identity can be respected, but insulated from politics. But if, though, on the other hand, religion, as seems inevitable, involves judgments about truth, and I think religion is about what is true or what people think is true, religious claims then can become caught up in the give and take of politics and not command the respect of the majority, perhaps. A central element of someone's identity, like gender and race, can be respected, but has no implications for others. The state can remain neutral about such manifestations. But once assertions are made about, say, the common good and that this is right, that is wrong, the issue is no longer one about the believer, but about the content of belief. Quirks of identity can be tolerated, but objections to public policy and demands for opt-outs, as when in Canada and indeed other countries now, then there appears to be a challenge to democratic decisions. What happens to the religious conscience in a secular democracy that has gone along another path? The conclusion of McClure and Taylor is that within the context of contemporary societies marked by moral and religious diversity, it is not religious convictions in themselves that must enjoy special status, but rather all core beliefs that allow individuals to structure their moral identity. So it isn't that religion is about truth, it's about me and my identity. Freedom of religion then becomes a mere subcategory of freedom of conscience. It all comes down to the intensity of an individual's commitment and not what it is a commitment to. An idea of freedom of religion, that religious principles matter because they express identity, therefore, avoids knotty questions of truth. Perhaps they mean to. But either then religious beliefs about truth can be elided into personal preferences, or religion is just one amongst many conceptions of public good. And why should it be given particular preference? That is the question. Requests for special accommodation for religious principles can be, very often are, set aside as a special pleading. Why do you want privileges for yourself? The question would go. But the belief in a transcendent source of obligation, a belief in a God demanding obligations that transcend the importance of the state and its decisions, not humanly constructed. All of that gives religion a special force. The reduction of a claim to objective truth to mere subjective concern, to preference, changes the subject in a remarkable way. The change from truth to identity changes the subject. Caring about something deeply is not the same as the conviction that I'm required by some transcendent authority to live in a particular way. So that sense of obligation to a higher authority makes religion frightening to secular proponents of democracy. It suggests an unwillingness to compromise, and that's one reason some see religion as intrinsically divisive and in need of stringent control. Yet for a neutral state, so-called, to treat all religious belief as subjective preference is already to decide the issue against the claims of religion to truth. Taking the claims of religion seriously means recognizing that they're potentially about more than personal commitments. The idea of religious liberty actually recognizes that. And even if it's widened to include those who deny religion, making it simply a matter of conscience, all of that inevitably downgrades religion. Whether we should treat religion only in terms of individual identity is indeed one of the points at issue in a diverse society. Now, as we have seen, religion has a collective dimension. It involves institutions, which makes it particularly vulnerable to manipulation by the state, and its appeal to authorities beyond the state, even to God, endangers other secular authority. No totalitarian state can allow reference to a God above the state. Restrictions on religion, though, do, as I keep on saying, go to the heart of all freedom because it is so central to people's concerns. And there is much evidence, historically and in the contemporary world, that restrictions on religious freedom strike at the heart of all freedoms and indeed do easily give rise to different forms of conflict. Ignoring religion doesn't reduce conflict, it can increase it. People do not readily accept that they're not allowed to live in accordance with their most precious beliefs. The maintenance of religious liberty, however, ought not to be based on some calculation concerning keeping internal peace, but on deep principle. If human rights, and there's a lot of talk about human rights nowadays, perhaps even too much, but if human rights are to mean anything more than what states find it expedient to uphold for a time, they have to be grounded in a vision of what it is to flourish as a human being. Our human nature includes a propensity to respond in a religious manner to the world and to reason about the significance of that, and the human wish and ability to hold, reject, or change religious beliefs must be of central importance. And of course, the ability to change one's religious beliefs is in our contemporary world a matter of great contention, particularly in Islam. Religious freedom is not the only human right or the whole of human freedom. Now, what happens when it clashes with other rights? This problem becomes more pressing in a diverse, pluralist society where there is disagreement about priorities. A religious minority can find itself at odds with current law. At times of change, social norms also change, and religious majorities can even suddenly find themselves in minorities. A relativist, somebody who thinks the truth is just relative to a society, is what this society thinks, that society thinks, there isn't anything true overall. A relativist finds no difficulty. You move with the times. What was true 50 years ago isn't true now. You often hear that. So what is true, what is right, is relative to a society then or now. Social attitudes change. Views about, say, the nature of marriage change. Some would say that views have changed about same-sex marriage, so that now it is acceptable, particularly in the West. 50 years ago it wouldn't have been. Well, if you really believe in what it is for humans to flourish, that view can't be accepted at face value. Either something was wrong then and wrong now, or right then and right now. You can't just say it changes. Themselves actually do appear to take on a transcendental validity. Now, what happens when rights clash because there are different rights? Religious freedom is often thought fundamental to all freedom. I mentioned before, it's called the first freedom in the United States. It's mentioned first in the US Constitution. Many would argue that that's not a coincidence, that the founders of the United States thought it was crucial to democracy. Yet even if there is no hierarchy of rights, that doesn't lessen the importance of the right to be free in the area of religion. It's at least as important as the others. We should be free to believe and free to manifest our beliefs. The diverse democratic societies of the Western world, however, give plenty of examples of religion under pressure from the pursuit of other rights, and this is very true at the moment. How far should people in a religiously diverse society be expected to modify their practices in the light of the claims of other people who don't agree with them. This is what, in a sense, living in a democracy means. Majorities in democracies bear very heavily on the consciences of minorities, and in a secular society, they bear very heavily on the consciences of religious people. Professionals in the field of medicine, for example, might be expected, and are sometimes expected, to take part in practices, particularly at the beginning and end of lives, abortion, euthanasia, that many will find repugnant. If you believe in the sanctity of life, abortion and euthanasia are exceedingly questionable, to put it mildly. So freedom can never be just a matter of allowing others, though, to do what you agree with. It should be a matter of accepting that others can do things with which we disagree. The idea of freedom and of diversity are never far apart, and democracy must thrive on difference. So democracy has to be tolerant. And one policy might be to try to accommodate difference, even in the course of implementing a policy, instead of riding roughshod over people's consciences. Canada is an interesting example. It's been wrestling with issues about religious diversity, and one Canadian, not Taylor, describing the situation in Canada in general and in Quebec from about 2007, writes, "The common language to describe the management or governance of religious diversity has become that of reasonable accommodation." An interesting concept. The idea was that if possible, you should make allowances for people's consciences, like conscientious objectors in time of war. Others should not be coerced into going against strongly held principles. Now that means when rights clash with each other or with public policy, they should be respected as far as is reasonable. Yet that's not always easy, particularly if the state, because of this commitment to an imagined neutrality, is itself reluctant to appeal to any substantive principles. I wonder how far a state can, even the notion of equality. But what standards to be called on to decide what is reasonable in reasonable accommodation? The disputes which seek resolution can themselves reappear in arguments about the limits of reason. Religious and non-religious views have different ideas about that and what constitutes reasonableness. If all religion is perceived as intrinsically irrational and intractable, and some people think it is, the aim of reasonably accommodating religion at all becomes problematic. What is to count itself as public reason is highly contested. Many think that religion has no part of public reason. It isn't reasonable. So at the heart of any idea of reasonable accommodation must be that of compromise, and in particular of not coercing a party in a dispute into doing something that seems deeply repugnant. Coercion cuts across ideas of freedom. Yet law itself can coerce, and if a democratic majority ensures that a law is passed, that is the law. And what right should a disaffected minority have not to comply with it once it's been democratically discussed and approved? Now the quick answer seems to be none if there's to be one law for all society. People shouldn't opt out of the law. And that's why the prospect of different religious groups living by different laws can arouse so much horror. The idea that Muslims or Jews can operate with their own laws about marriage, divorce and so on, outside the agreed framework of a democratic society, seems to begin to undercut the whole idea of democracy. So the idea of Sharia law in Islam, for instance, worries many people, particularly in a Western democracy. Many would object, for instance, if the rights of women under religious laws seem significantly less than those in force in wider society. The idea of a society built on different pillars, with each religion forming a different pillar, is in the end one in which, like the ruin of an ancient building, the Forum in Rome or somewhere like that. All that's left is separate pillars alongside each other, roof gone, nothing binding them together. And the monolithic conception of different religions itself causes problems. Religions themselves, as I've said, can be internally diverse with different emphases, and that's apparent in the history of Christianity, but it's also true of other religions. Judaism and Islam, for instance, have their more conservative wings, as well as other divisions. Now, courts may find it difficult to assess the validity of someone's stand on a religious principle then, and is this genuine if someone is even diverting from the majority in the religion and expressing the view of a minority. But that doesn't mean the stand isn't principled, but within a religion as well as outside it, majority rule can be oppressive. Now, examples illustrating all this came in cases before the European Court of Human Rights, with judgments given just a few months ago this year. They all happen to concern cases from my own country, the United Kingdom, but as I've said, they can be generalised. They set principles which should apply across the whole of Europe, Western and Eastern, all of the countries belonging to the Council of Europe. Now, the first of the cases, the first two, concerned the wearing of a cross by an employee of British Airways against the airline's policy, and also the wearing of a crucifix by a nurse in a hospital. And the court, somewhat confusingly, upheld the right to wear a cross in one case, not the other. Now, these are all arguments about the public display of symbols. They play a large part in arguments in the United States, for instance, and also in France. And this can stand as proxy for wider arguments about the whole place of religion in public life. Religion shouldn't be seen in the public square, it might be thought. And I think that, for instance, the wider acknowledgement of religious symbols here in Russia now might be a sign that things have changed. Think, and you know better than I, how different symbols may be on display now from 30 years ago. As we have seen, though, the existence of religious diversity, the importance of not favouring one group over another, might suggest that religion should be for private expression, not public display. And in the British Airways case, though, there was a complication that Sikhs and Muslims could wear insignia, turbans, headscarves, respectively, and the ban of crosses seemed to be very arbitrary. It seems to amount to discrimination against Christians. Now, one line often taken, particularly by opponents of all religions, is that the display in a public place of the symbols of only one religion is unfair to the practitioners of another. Again, we've got the idea that we want neutrality somehow or other. Letting none of them exhibit their symbols would seem to be just an example of a secularism that, to be neutral, wishes to remove all public manifestation of religion. But this is all about symbols, and it is perhaps symbolic. Perhaps more important than the use of symbols is the desire of individuals to hold to their consciences and not to be forced into behaviour they believe is wrong, even when they're in a minority, perhaps a small one, and even in a democracy. And it was in this context that judgment was given on the other two of the four cases under consideration, bundled together by the European Court, which both involved the question of religious freedom balanced against the right not to be discriminated against, in these cases because of sexual orientation. Now, rights can conflict, and in one of the cases, a civil registrar registering births, marriages and deaths, in post for many years in a part of London, she found that as the law changed, she was expected to register civil partnerships between same-sex couples. She claimed she could not conscientiously do this because of her Christian beliefs, which everyone accepted were sincere. But the European Court recalled that in its case law it is held that differences in treatment based on sexual orientation require particularly serious reasons by way of justification. So the requirement that freedom of religion is limited by consideration of the rights and freedoms of others that you get in the European Convention meant that the right to manifest her beliefs was therefore trumped by the right not to be discriminated against. So instead of rights being thought to be of equal importance, instead indeed of the right to religious freedom being thought of particular importance, it's actually being said to be less important than the right not to be discriminated against. And particularly in this case, the right not to be discriminated against on grounds of sexual orientation. It seems being discriminated against on the grounds of religion doesn't matter. Now, that's all very well, but given that in a democratic society, arbitrary discrimination on such grounds as race, and in this case sexual orientation, between individuals is regarded as a breach of their equality and dignity, the question is, how far is that reasonable? And that brings us back to this question of reasonable accommodation. When two recognized rights, in this case non-discrimination, freedom of religion and belief, when two recognized rights conflict, making no effort to accommodate each other does not take seriously the needs of a diverse society with diverse religious views and non-religious views. As I've said, many may think there must be only one law for all. Reasonable accommodation should not involve those helping those who are unreasonable. But whoever is in the majority, accommodation should not be regarded as a majority graciously tolerating a minority, and perhaps only within the limits set by the majority. This seems to be what's happening. Genuine accommodation should be a mutual transaction whereby each recognizes the intrinsic rights of the other and tries to ensure that they are, within reason, catered for. The whole language of equal rights suggests that rights are not the gift of a majority with exemptions to law in their gift. Rights are built into the scheme of things, should be recognized, and in cases of clashes, a reasonable balance achieved between them. Only in that way can minorities gain protection, particularly religious ones in a secular society, and particularly minorities even in a democracy. Power structures vary, but the temptation in a democracy is always to make prevailing public opinion the final arbiter, and in the interest of justice for all, that must be resisted. Such a balance of rights can easily be made in a reasonable way. A Muslim who takes on a job as a bartender and then refuses to sell alcohol is being unreasonable. A supermarket that insists on putting a Muslim employee in charge of alcohol provision, when there are many other roles to be filled, many other shelves to be stacked, is also being unreasonable. Religious concerns, though, are often in European courts, I'm talk of Western Europe particularly, but also in the European Court of Human Rights, supported to other social priorities. The majority in a secular democracy wants their way. But the test of a truly free and diverse society must be that people are allowed to live according to their most basic principles, even when they diverge from conventional opinion, even when they lose the vote in a democracy. Freedom only exists when we are willing to allow others to act in ways with which we disagree. Now, if we dismiss issues of truth, particularly in connection with religion, we can easily take it for granted that each person's dignity is expressed through their own choices. They are then, in a Nietzschean fashion, self-creating beings like artists whose lives possess the meaning each gives for whatever reason. And then differences ought to be respected simply as part of the intrinsic dignity each human being has. The connection with a stress on respecting individual preferences is obvious, yet the view is incoherent, since it stems from a stress on the objective dignity of human beings, and saying that's true, we ought to respect it. And some would hold, indeed, that the idea of human worth itself has a clear religious origin, only makes sense within that context. As I've said, we're all made in the image of God. And if that might be so, dismissing religion, seeing it only as a subjective preference, may well be risky. It undermines the very reason people have for believing human dignity in the first place. The stress on the ultimate value of each atomic individual, though itself needing justification, does still fail to meet the conundrum of how we live together in a society, how we balance choices when they conflict with each other. And that's where we need this notion of the common good. One method is to aggregate preferences in a democratic way. Count who wants what and let the majority have their way, imposing their will on minorities. Some people think that is democracy. Most might then get what they want, but even then a reasonable accommodation may be better to enable both majorities and minorities better to achieve their ends. That brings us back to the question not just of people want, but of how what is good for everyone can be achieved. Democratic societies encompassing major disagreements about priorities then can't escape the issue of the weight, if any, to be given to religious convictions. While religious people must not coerce those who disagree but maximize freedom, secularists also have to acknowledge the existence of a religious conscience. They should consider whether legal exemptions should be made in particular cases. There may be a very real fear that society will splinter unless one law is rigorously applied to all, but that doesn't seem to meet the concerns of those who are not just in a political minority, but have deep objections of a religious or anti-religious kind to having to obey a law they see as immoral, stemming from their understanding of the nature of human life. As I've already indicated, exceptions are made in many countries in favour of conscientious objection in time of war, and problems arise in modern medicine, euthanasia, assisted suicides. Might doctors and nurses be required to participate in those if they become legal? Just if a democratic society votes for euthanasia, does everybody have to follow in line with that, particularly in the medical profession? All these cases involve beliefs about the sanctity of human life. So the difficulty is adjudicating between rival conceptions of what constitutes public good. Imposing one conception of it in a uniform manner is the stuff of totalitarianism. Religions are particularly likely to have deep-rooted, passionate conceptions of the common good. They have a clear idea of what constitutes human flourishing. Their ideas may well differ from each other and from more secular ideas. In pluralist societies where diversity is the norm, the aim then must be not just to resolve disputes, to keep the peace, but to resolve them in ways that leave the integrity and outlook of different groups still intact. So-called multiculturalism all too often has become a relativism isolating communities instead of drawing them into a debate of where the common good may lie. Different conceptions of the public good are not ends in themselves. Diversity of belief should not be celebrated so much as engaged with, worked through. There is still an issue as to what's right, what is good. Even so, I keep on reiterating, concern for minority views is the very stuff of democracy, whether religion is in the majority or the minority. Each state has to have definite principles, and not least an affirmation of the dependence of democracy itself on the notions of equality and freedom. A society formed by Christian principles, or indeed those of some other religion, need not give those up, must not give those up, in the interests of pluralism, however defined. The issue is what welcome is to be given to alternative beliefs, and the freedom with which they can, within reasonable limits, be put into practice. A free society must treat its citizens equally, not picking out for some special favour. And I mean it's, for instance, inconsistent to allow the wearing of a Muslim headscarf not a Christian cross, or the other way around. But that belief in equality has to be grounded. It isn't a substitute for definite belief, as it so often is in the Western world. It's a part of secularism that equality is all that matters. But the belief in equality is a substantive belief of tremendous importance, containing important insights itself into a constituent part of the common good, the public good. Inevitably, those substantive views are bound up with religious ones. Because religious people have views about the common good and should be allowed to express them and live by them as far as is possible. Religion is not just a central part of the lives of individuals. It makes crucial claims about the nature of a good society. The view of religion as an irrational preference makes it less significant. Its nature is distorted. Religion is typically concerned with what is true. I keep on saying that. Religion claims truth, and that has enormous implications for society. It contributes to our understanding of human nature and the place of humans in society. Religion then has a political relevance, not just because it can cause problems in divided societies. It can also contribute positively to public debate concerning human welfare and human harm. And when such issues are at stake, imposing one view, one set of practices, stifles democratic freedom. All societies need basic animating principles. But the belief in freedom has to be basic. It's at the root of everything. Such a belief itself depends on the alleged truth of beliefs about the human condition. It assumes the possibility of objective truth is often closely linked, as in the philosophy of the 17th century British philosopher John Locke, with the religious views. Locke held, and he influenced the founding of the United States as well, he held that God, having given man an understanding to direct his actions, has allowed him a freedom of the will and liberty of acting. And there, in philosophical terms, you have the relationship of God and freedom. Freedom is a God-given gift. Locke's philosophy was a product of the early English Enlightenment, not like the later French Enlightenment, which was more atheistic. And that early Enlightenment also saw the birth of modern science and the work of people such as Newton, the founding of the Royal Society in London in 1662. It stressed the importance of human reason, which is terribly important, but it did so in a way that based it on a belief in God. It saw reason as the candle of the Lord, reason rooted in the God. And in this, as I've said, it was markedly different from what went on later in France. Now, I mention that because it's arguable that the influence of the later French Enlightenment still holds sway in Western Europe, it still holds sway in the Council of Europe, through perhaps the influence of France, and produces a suspicion of religion. It carries with it the idea that religion is fundamentally irrational. But the early Enlightenment, which influenced the founding of the United States, had a more religious view of the basis of reason and the founding of notions of truth and freedom and equality on the idea of God himself as their guarantor. It is difficult to give a proper justification for natural rights and for human rights outside a religious context. I would go as far as to say that. For political reasons, the first article of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights doesn't mention God, but the religious provenance is clear. We read, all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Now, who or how they were endowed isn't made clear. The notion of brotherhood, though, implicitly invokes the idea of a common father, a creator who's the source of our nature, and that's invoked explicitly in the American Declaration of Independence. Now, that's a view of natural law. You don't have to be religious to accept it, actually, but it does help. Any democracy, then, that wants to uphold the values expressed in the Declaration of Human Rights as it should, attacks manifestations of a religious conscience at its peril. It should cherish them, value them, protect them. Such a conscience provides one justification for belief in them. The human freedom that gives rise to diversity of belief and practice should be cherished, and along with the exercise of reason, it's essential for understanding what's true. Freedom, reason, and the idea of truth are all indissolubly linked. You can't really knock away one of those at all without, in fact, the rest going. None of us may possess as much of objective truth as we'd like. That gives rise to diversity and disagreement. The limitations of being human are all too obvious, but striving for truth in many spheres remains our most important characteristic. Now that leaves us with an important conundrum. Diverse beliefs, often in disagreement with each other, are a challenge from an intellectual and political standpoint, and that's particularly so in the area of religion, where the most difficult and intractable issues are faced by humans trapped in finitude. We have to engage with those disagreements. Just accepting them or celebrating them is to fail to take them seriously. Yet the imposition through coercion of one set of opinions and practices, even if when it's done in the name of democracy, also fails to respect the freedom, reason, and yearning for truth that should underlie all religion. Thank you very much.
Я хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить